You're listening to Audiology. Support our work on Patreon and be sure to submit your requests for topics in the comments below. The Phoenix program was a clandestine operation, initiated and overseen by the CIA during the Vietnam War, with participation from American, Australian, and Vietnamese armed forces. By 1969, its leadership transitioned to the Civil Operations and Revolutionary Development Support, CORDS Group. From 1967 until 1972, the program aimed to dismantle the Viet Cong, VC, by engaging in activities such as infiltration, targeted killings, torture, detention, counterterrorism measures, and intense questioning. The CIA defined the Phoenix program as a strategy to undermine and eliminate the VC's political support system, based on the notion that the North Vietnamese insurgency was sustained by local civilian backing. Referred to as the VC's infrastructure, the program claimed to have neutralized a total of 81,740 individuals suspected of VC involvement, with 26,369 losing their lives. Among those killed, conventional military actions were responsible for 87% of the deaths, while Phoenix operatives accounted for the remaining 13%. The program faced widespread criticism over issues like the accidental slaying of innocents, the inhumane treatment of detainees, the heavy-handed interrogation techniques employed, and allegations that the program was used to settle personal vendettas. Despite the controversies and the negative portrayal by its critics, who even branded it as an extrajudicial killing initiative, the program was effective in stifling VC activities. When the existence of the Phoenix program became widely known, it sparked a public outcry and was subjected to congressional scrutiny, which eventually pressured the CIA into discontinuation. However, a follow-up initiative named Plan F6 was subsequently implemented by the South Vietnamese government. Following the 1954 Geneva Accords, North Vietnam created a group of several thousand individuals to garner support for the communist cause in anticipation of elections. When it became evident the elections would not occur, this group laid the groundwork for the Viet Cong, an insurgent force aiming to unite Vietnam under communist rule from the north. Despite early U.S. military attempts to combat the Viet Cong insurgency and its civilian arm, the Viet Cong's civilian infrastructure, VCI, these efforts fell short. By the mid-1960s, the VCI had grown to between 80,000 and 150,000 members and wasn't involved in combat, but rather supported the insurgents through recruitment, indoctrination, intelligence, and logistics. They swiftly formed so-called shadow governments in the South Vietnamese countryside, displacing local leaders loyal to the Saigon regime with communist operatives. The VCI targeted small, strategically significant towns and villages, often those that were sympathetic to communism or that were not closely monitored by Saigon or its army. The takeover process by the VCI began with threats and violence. They would intimidate or abduct local officials to force compliance or send dissenters to re-education in the north. Those who resisted were executed. Once in control, an area would serve as a support base for the Viet Cong, helping with everything from shelter and supplies to intelligence and recruitment, and enforcing taxation for the communist cause. The program in question consisted mainly of two elements: provincial reconnaissance units, PRUs, and various regional centers where suspects were interrogated. The role of the PRUs was to either eliminate or apprehend individuals who were believed to be part of the Viet Cong, VC, or those possessing knowledge about VC endeavors, including civilians. Many of these detainees were subjected to harsh interrogations at the centers to extract intelligence about the VC's operations. This intelligence was then utilized by military leaders to direct the PRUs in additional missions aiming to capture or eradicate VC affiliates. The success of the program was gauged by the number of VC operatives who were either neutralized, a term which referred to killing, incarcerating or flipping them to become defectors. The establishment of the interrogation centers and the PRUs can be credited to Pierre de Silva, the CIA's Saigon station chief. De Silva was an advocate of counter-terrorism strategy, pushing for its application not only against the VC, but also against non-combatant populations to diminish support for the VC. Initially created in 1964, PRUs were originally called counter-terror teams, but underwent a name change to PRUs after concerns arose regarding the negative connotations associated with the term terror. By 1967, the U.S. consolidated all its pacification initiatives in Vietnam under an umbrella program called Civil Operations and Revolutionary Development Support, CORDS, which managed diverse strategies, including forming a peasant militia that expanded to 500,000 recruits by 1971. Under CORDS, the Intelligence Coordination and Exploitation Program, ISEX, was launched, later renamed Phoenix, to centralize intelligence gathering on the VC. This effort was inspired by a plan penned by Nelson Brickham and was influenced by David Galula's theories on counterinsurgency from the Algerian War. The South Vietnamese equivalent of Phoenix was known as Phung Hoang, symbolizing good fortune and success. The impact of the VC infrastructure became particularly evident during the 1968 Tet Offensive, reinforcing the significance of the Phoenix program. By 1970, there were over 700 American Phoenix advisors dispersed across South Vietnam. The Phoenix program officially lasted until December 1972, though some components persisted until the collapse of Saigon in 1975. The Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, is an American agency responsible for gathering intelligence and conducting covert operations. The United States has specialized military units known as Special Operations Forces that carry out highly challenging and strategic missions. During the Vietnam War, the U.S. Army had intelligence gathering groups that were part of the U.S. Military Assistance Command, Vietnam MACV, a unit tasked with supervising all American military support and advisory activities in the region. The U.S. Navy had an elite unit, SEAL Detachment Bravo, engaged in covert and amphibious operations during the conflict. The U.S. Marine Corps operated the First Force Reconnaissance Company, an intelligence and reconnaissance unit that was positioned close to Da Nang in Vietnam. Australia contributed to the efforts with their own special forces, represented by the Australian Army Training Team Vietnam, AATTV, who provided training and support to the local forces. The Republic of Vietnam also had their own National Police Field Force, which worked on internal security and field operations within the country. The primary focus of the Phoenix program was to gather intelligence on the Viet Cong, VC, leading to their capture, persuasion to defect, or elimination. Local militias and police forces played a central role in executing the program rather than relying heavily on the military. Journalist Douglas Valentine noted that this program was unique because its targets were civilians rather than military personnel. To ensure the lawful operation of the Phoenix program, special regulations were put into place that required arresting and prosecuting individuals presumed to be communists. To prevent wrongful accusations and ensure that due diligence was conducted, the law mandated that there must be 3 separate pieces of evidence to convict someone of being a part of the Viet Cong infrastructure, which the communists referred to as the revolutionary infrastructure. Once convicted, a person could be imprisoned for 2-year periods, which could be renewed to a total of 6 years. The strategy of the Phoenix program, according to a military directive, was to precisely target prominent Viet Cong political figures and operatives, rather than using broad, indiscriminate measures. Nonetheless, the program's aggressive tactics, which included random searches and detentions, the confinement of many innocent civilians, and the overpowering use of military force, had adverse impacts on the civilian population, Intelligence gleaned from interrogations often led to search and destroy missions, with the aim of locating and eliminating VC members. The majority of those who died under the Phoenix program lost their lives in conventional military engagements, rather than through the program's direct actions. Many individuals were only identified as VC operatives after they were killed during such military confrontations, which were frequently initiated by the Viet Cong themselves. In a specific period from January 1970 to March 1971, a substantial 94%, 927 out of 10,443 of those accounted for as killed were pursuant to such military campaigns. Valentine recounts that, at the interrogation centers, individuals were subjected to a variety of brutal tortures. These horrifying methods included sexual assault of various forms, using animals or objects, often culminating in the victim's death. Prisoners were also subjected to electrical shocks by attaching wires to their most sensitive body parts. Another technique described is the water treatment, specifics of which aren't detailed here. Similarly horrendous was the airplane technique, where a detainee's arms were tied and looped over a hook, leaving them hanging while they were beaten. Other cruel practices included severe beatings with flexible tubing or whips, and the use of police dogs to viciously attack incarcerated individuals. Meanwhile, military intelligence officer K. Barton Osborne reported witnessing acts of extreme cruelty, such as the insertion of a dowel into a detainee's ear, which was then hammered through the brain, resulting in death. He also noted the intentional starvation of a Vietnamese woman thought to be involved with local political education. Additionally, Osborne described the use of electrical devices to deliver shocks to sensitive areas of both male and female prisoners as a method to force confessions or information. However, author Gary Kulik challenges Osborne's credibility, arguing that Osborne's accounts are inconsistent, exaggerated, or entirely falsified. Kulik suggests that Osborne was known for making over-the-top statements to draw attention to himself. It's noted that Osborne served in the Marine Corps during a period before the official implementation of the Phoenix program, and that the described torture was conducted by South Vietnamese forces under the oversight of the CIA and Special Forces. The Phoenix program's operations frequently involved the goal of eliminating specified individuals, occasionally by assassination or other lethal methods. The Provincial Reconnaissance Units, PRUs, often expected to encounter hostility in contentious areas and typically operated with a policy of firing before questioning. Lieutenant Vincent Okamoto, who served for a brief period as an intelligence liaison for the Phoenix program in 1968 and was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, described the difficulty in locating blacklist suspects due to the lack of concrete information like addresses or phone numbers. The usual method involved capturing someone in a village and demanding information about the whereabouts of a person of interest. Local residents were often too scared to reveal anything. To identify a suspect's location, a Phoenix team would cover an informant's head, leaving only the eyes visible, and lead them through the village on a makeshift leash. If the informant signaled when passing a certain house, the team would return later that night to confront whoever answered the door, typically resulting in the death of that individual and, at times, their family members, based on the assumption they were communists. In contrast, William Colby, who was in charge of the program, refuted claims that their intention was to carry out a systematic assassination strategy. He argued that capturing targets alive was far more beneficial for intelligence purposes. Colby highlighted the emphasis on capturing these individuals and extracting information through legal and intelligent interrogation techniques. He affirmed that U.S. personnel were trained not to engage in assassinations or violate the rules of warfare. From 1968 to 1972, the Phoenix program, led by the United States and South Vietnam, targeted and incapacitated a large number of individuals they suspected to be part of the Viet Cong, VC, resulting in the imprisonment, defections, or deaths of 81,740 people. Out of these, 26,369 were explicitly reported to have been killed according to official Phoenix counts, while investigative reporter Seymour Hersh cited South Vietnamese figures that put the death toll at approximately 41,000. This program was particularly damaging to the VC infrastructure from 1969 to 1971, especially in key areas. A significant majority, around 87%, of the deaths were caused by more conventional military efforts rather than the Phoenix operatives themselves. The success of the Phoenix program didn't go unnoticed by the VC. By 1970, they were consciously planning attacks against South Vietnam's pacification efforts, with Phoenix officials being a prime target. These assassination campaigns were intense. For instance, in the area around Da Nang, VC officials ordered the killing of approximately 400 people, classified as government oppressors, aiming to wipe out anyone connected with the pacification efforts. Post-war reflections by North Vietnamese officials, including comments made to William Colby, former director of the CIA, suggest that the Phoenix program was highly effective and posed one of the greatest challenges to the communist forces. From 1960 to 1975. The program's intelligence-gathering capabilities enabled the exposure of the VC infrastructure at the provincial levels. Stuart A. Harrington, who has expertise on the subject, pointed out that, regardless of the debate on the actual effectiveness of the Phoenix program across different regions, from the VC's perspective, it was seen as immensely threatening. This was because the program was effective in dismantling their clandestine government structures that exerted control over civilian populations. Consequently, the North Vietnamese meted out harsh treatment to individuals affiliated with the Phoenix program after the war, viewing them as having dealt a potentially fatal blow to their revolutionary endeavors. The Phoenix program was largely unknown to the American populace and policymakers in Washington while it was active. Francis Fitzgerald presented arguments against the initiative to U.S. National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger in 1970, which she hinted at in her book Fire in the Lake. One of the initial detractors of the program was Ed Murphy, a former military intelligence operative turned peace activist, who voiced his criticism in 1970. The program faced scrutiny during numerous congressional hearings in the U.S. On the last day of the hearings on U.S. aid in Vietnam in 1971, K. Barton Osborne referred to Phoenix as a program for impersonal and clinical killing. As a result, the military leadership in Vietnam distributed a directive affirming that the anti-VCI effort was grounded in South Vietnamese law, complied with international war laws, and mandated U.S. personnel to report legal violations. Former CIA analyst Samuel A. Adams characterized the program in a CBC News interview as a campaign of assassinations that also engaged in torture practices, including threats and intimidation via mock executions from helicopters. Though Gary Kulik admitted that one could not definitively prove the absence of such helicopter incidents, he also noted that no evidence supports these claims and pointed out that the loud noise in helicopters would render interrogations impractical. Nick Terse reported that abuses within the program were frequent and that it was common for Vietnamese individuals to falsely identify rivals as Viet Cong, to have American forces target them. The ineptitude and corruption among Phoenix program officials were also problematic, prompting the creation of monthly neutralization targets. Unfortunately, these targets often led to made-up charges or unjust detentions, and there were instances where district officials would accept bribes to release suspects. Once the abuses of the Phoenix program came to light, resulting in negative press, the program was formally discontinued. However, it covertly persisted under the name Plan F6, with the South Vietnamese government taking the reins.